That is where we're picking up today in Genesis chapter 12. If you have your Bibles, you can turn there. But as we do, there is a big difference between promises that are made and promises that are kept. There are a big difference between promises that are kept over a lifetime and are proof of a trusted character versus those that are spoken and never really followed through on. And there are promises that are kept not only over a lifetime but over generations that are proof of God's trusted character. And we're going to look at that. One of the ways you see most often when we talk about the idea of proof or promises is in wedding vows. I thought this was interesting. We were talking about spiders just recently. Let me give you a wedding vow that I found that I thought was really interesting. And I don't know if this promise was kept at the wedding vows, but I thought these are really good wedding vows for anybody who is looking to get married in the future or anything like that. Let me just kind of put this out. So the groom's name is Dan. I don't know if these are real or made up, but just go with me. And then the wife's name, or soon to be, is Monica. So Dan, he says this. This is the officiant giving these vows recited to Dan. Do you promise, Dan, to kill spiders and everything else that Monica deems creepy or gross? If you ever find yourself sinking in a paddle boat, do you attest that it is your turn to swim? Do you promise to let Monica rein you in at the music store because you probably have enough guitars for now? Do you promise to try to not steal the covers at night or beat Monica up because you're having that ninja dream again? Do you vow to embrace Monica's love of the ocean and enjoy it with her as often as is feasible? Pretty decent vows. To Monica, he says, do you, Monica, promise to attend car shows with Dan and at least pretend to show interest in horsepower, engines, custom modifications, even if you have no idea what in the world he's talking about? Do you promise to go fishing provided Dan takes care of anything slimy, scaly, pokey, or just plain mean-spirited? Do you promise to let Dan rein you in at the shoe store because you probably have enough shoes for now? Or others, it may go the opposite. In the back. Do you both promise to be supportive of each other as individuals, never trying to change the other, to support and encourage one another, and to give all that you've got to give to make each other's dreams come true? He says, with this ring, I do promise to love you unconditionally and make each day the best it can be. Now, vows we make at our wedding day, I hope that we are able to sustain those, keep those. So for many of us, we probably don't even know what we said at our wedding day. We're like, it was probably something good. I just really don't remember. But this is different. This that we're going into today is the idea that promises made are different than promises kept. And we're going to see that story this morning. Promises kept over a lifetime are proof of trusted character. We're going to see that today. And later we're going to see that promises kept over generations, through time, through thousands of years, promises that are kept over generations are proof of God's trusted character. And that we can trust in a God who made promises to Abraham as much as we can trust in a God who is today. So this man, Abraham, is where, I don't know if you know this or not, but the man Abraham is where three major religions meet. Father Abraham is where they met together with Islam, Judaism, and Christianity, all find their roots back into Abram, and there's reasons for that, but we could talk about that at a later date. Abraham as well, you maybe have grown up in church. Unfortunately, you may have grown up in church, and you maybe have heard the song, Abraham had many sons, and many sons had Father Abraham. And for those who don't know what I'm talking about, you're lucky. But for many of us who grew up in church, you remember that song, and it's going to be in your head all the rest of today. And many sons had right foot, left foot. Yep, you got it. We're weird. Christians were weird. I get it. But that was a song that we grew up, and we knew that he had many sons. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. But Abraham, just to catch us up, doesn't actually come into our knowledge or understanding in chapter 12. He actually comes into our knowledge and understanding in chapter 11. So we've just finished up Babel, and we talked about how that then links into here, is that there is a promise that God is making through this man, Abram. Abraham, I'm going to go back and forth. So just Abraham, same dude, okay? Just so you know. Abraham was one of three boys born to Terah. It was Abram, Nahor, and Haran. And one of his brothers, Haran, dies apparently in the presence of their father, Terah, leaving behind his nephew Lot to be in the care of Abraham. Abraham as well, we find out in Genesis chapter 11, marries Sarai, and Nahor marries Milcah. And Abraham, with his dad, his nephew Lot, his wife Sarah, they head to Canaan but stop north of Haran. And God says in 12:1, God says to Abram, leave Haran and go. That's all he says. There's no real direction. It's just leave here and go. And what we're going to see this morning, that is, as Abraham goes in chapter 12 and in chapter 13, which will be today, you're going to see him go, and every single time he goes, wherever he goes, God is continually reminding Abraham of his promises to Abraham. And the first promise that we have is in Genesis chapter 12, verses 1 through 3. Now the Lord said to Abram, go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land I will show you, and I will make you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. He says, I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you I will curse, and in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. That's an amazing first promise. It's a confidence builder to Abraham of it. When you go, I want you to leave, and I want you to go, but I will be with you. Now, the other thing you got to understand as he goes is Abraham is about 70 years old at this point, so he's kind of been past his midlife crisis. His kids are older at this point, and he has to now decide to go and trust at age 70 that God is who he says he is. So Abram goes to Canaan, the place his father Terah had set out to go originally, but did not make it there. To give us context of where he's going, you can see this map here. In the middle, or down towards the southern part of Iraq, is where the land of Ur is. There's actually still sediments and architecture there. Archaeology is still a part of that place down at the land of Ur. And then he is deciding to take his family, leave his dad, and travel all the way up into Turkey, where he will now go to Haran. Now, I don't know the furthest you've moved, or the process for which you moved, or how easily it was for you to take your family and move. I don't know if you rented a company. I don't know if you just had a job lined up and you were ready to roll. I don't know your story of how often you have moved, but I can say that none of us have truly had to do what Abraham has done, and that is simply, I want you to go, Abraham, where? I want you to finish your journey north up to Haran. And as he goes to Haran, there's no place to, there's not a job waiting for him. There's no confidence that there's going to be any kind of finances attached to this. He simply has to take all of the finances upon himself to get his family set up to travel that long of a distance up to Turkey and somehow dream and hope that he's going to make it all the way up to a land he has never been in, has no family in, has nothing there for him. He's just going by faith that this is what he's supposed to do. This is no easy task. I think we read this and we're like, oh, he just got his stuff and he took a walk up to Haran. This is cross continents. Across states. This is across nations. He's gone from Iraq all the way up through the deserts into Syria, across Syria, up into Turkey. Okay, that's a bit of a trek. Dad, are we there yet? Had to be a ridiculous statement all the way up into Turkey. And then we pick up in verse 5, where Abraham goes to Canaan, to his place his father had set out originally. It says this, and Abraham took Sarah his wife and Lot and his brother's son and all their possessions that they had gathered and the people that they had acquired in Haran, and they set out to go to the land of Canaan. When they came to the land of Canaan, Abraham passed through the land to the place at Shechem, to the oak of Moreh, at the time that the Canaanites were in the land. So he arrives at Canaan. He then keeps going south then to Shechem, because God said, okay, you're in Haran. I want you to go south. But there's still no direction. There's still no end up here, go here, stay this long. It's just simply go down south some way. He arrives at Canaan. Then he keeps going south to Shechem. The biggest obstacle is that there's no land for him. He's a sojourner. He's got to basically go where other people are. It says there's Canaanites that are already in possession of the nation, so he's going in as a squatter to these lands. And yet somehow he has in his mind this promise that he gave him in verses 1 through 3, that God will somehow make a nation out of you. It's just me, my family, a couple donkeys, some sheep, and I'm going into the land of Canaan. It's a pretty nasty place. It's a pretty brutal place. It's a very nasty environment to go into with these kind of people. And yet the promise is, Abraham, you're going to be a nation. The problem with becoming a nation is this. We know this, or maybe you don't, but in order to be a nation, you need a couple things. You need enough people to make a nation, number one. You need a law to govern the nation, and you also need land to have a nation. I mean, it's as if none of us have woken up one morning and we're like, I am a nation today. Like, what's your nation? It's the nation of me. Okay, where is your nation? It's right here. And you're like, well, where? Like, no, right around me is my nation. Like, that's just ridiculous. We'd all laugh at you, or we'd call the hospital. We'd get somebody to help you work through that issue, because that's not a nation. A nation is the United States of America. That's a nation. That's land. That's governance. That's law. That's people. And Abraham had none of those things as he sojourns south. And there's no timeline. God doesn't tell him, hey, you're going to be a nation in 5 years. That's doable, maybe, possibly, right? He doesn't tell him how long this is going to take. He just tells him you're going to become a nation. And I can say, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that you and I maybe had some big faith moments where we trusted God when we had nothing. But I don't know that any of us can really compare to what Abraham did here, and taking everything that he has, going and trusting that God will keep his promise to not only make him a great family, but to make him a great nation. And as he goes, isn't this the beautiful thing, that as he goes, we get in verse 7, the second promise of God. So there's been one promise in verses 1 through 3. Now we get the second promise in verse 7. Then the Lord appeared to Abram and said, to your offspring I will give this land. So he built an altar there to the Lord who had appeared to him. Now he's in the land that's already possessed. Canaan already has it. But he says, this will be your land. It's as if you move to another state, and the governor of that state already owns that state, but God's told you as you go in, this is going to be yours one day. That may ring a couple different ways, but to Abraham, that had to be incredibly off-putting. Like, how is this going to be possible? Because, one, I have no kids. That's an issue. There's no offspring. There's nothing around me that says this can be mine. I don't have the authority or the clout to do this on my own. And my wife Sarah's all I got, and this kid named Lot, who's my nephew, taking him along, that's all I got right now. And so he says, you're going to be a nation, so I don't have family. Land, don't have that. Already occupied by big people. Oh, and at this point, he's traveled enough and gone far enough that now Abraham is 75. Kind of past the prime of life when you're going to develop a nation, right? God continues to say, I'm going to promise, I'm going to give you these things. Abraham is doing well, though. Not one question from Abraham that we see here in Genesis chapter 12. Not one Moses moment. Not one Gideon moment of God, if you do this, then I will. There is just simple obedience and following by Abraham. This is amazing. And it is why Hebrews says of Abraham, by faith, Abraham obeyed when he was called to go out to a place that he was going to receive an inheritance. And as he went, not knowing where he was going, I mean, at least we have a destination. At least you have a job lined up. At least you have a state that you're moving toward. I mean, imagine your kids are like, where are we going to live? I don't know. Where are we going? South. Where? South. When are we going to stop? I'll tell you when we get there. When are we there? I'll tell you when it happens. Do you know? I don't know. God will tell me when it happens. Is there going to be a beam of light? I have no idea. We'll just know when we get there. And your kids are like, this is the worst plan you've ever had. Like, this is going to kill all of us. And you're like, trust me, we're good. He had no idea where he was going. By faith, he went to live in the land of promise as in a foreign land. Yes, he's in a foreign land. It's not his. Living in tents. It's even worse, right? There's not even a house. We just live in tents. We're nomads. Some of you are like, that would be amazing. Your kids would think that's not so amazing, right? We're just going to live in tents wherever we go with Isaac and Jacob and heirs with the same promise. For he was looking forward to the city that has foundations, whose designer and builder is God. By faith, Sarah herself received power to conceive, even when she was past the age, since she was considered him faithful and had promised. Therefore, from one man and him, and this is awesome, this tells you a little bit more about Abraham. Therefore, from one man and him as good as dead. Yes. If you ever get described that way, run. That's not a good description. You're as good as dead, man. You're really old. Thank you. He was as good as dead. Were born descendants as many as the stars in the heavens and as many as the innumerable grains of the sand by the seashore. Hebrews 11:8. God says, go. And we follow. And he says, you're as good as dead, Abraham, but you're good. Just keep moving along. Just keep shuffling, eating the pudding. You're good. Abraham moves and he goes, but he's He's not just eating pudding. He's got a lot of things happening in his world right now. And he goes, and he goes, and he goes as far south in the story as Egypt. And when he gets down to Egypt, we're going to skip some things, we're going to come back. When he gets down to Egypt, one of the first things he does is freak out. He gets to the land of Egypt. He's gone as far south as he thinks he can possibly go. This must be the place God's called me to be. And when he gets into Egypt, he has a moment. He has a moment where his pride and his fear and his ego get the best of him, and he does some things that are not so healthy as a follower of God. It's not so healthy for really any of us. But when he gets into Egypt, out of fear, he gives his wife to another man. And let's just, in Genesis chapter 12, now there was a famine, verse 10, now there was a famine in the land, so Abram went down to Egypt to sojourn there, for the famine was severe in the land. And when he was about to enter Egypt, he said to Sarai his wife, I know that you're a woman, beautiful in appearance. Ladies, run. Okay, he's setting you up. He's setting her up. This is not good. I know that you're a woman, beautiful in appearance. And when the Egyptians see you, they will say, this is his wife. Then they will kill me, but they will let you live. To which Sarah's probably like, okay, good deal. So far, so good. Keep going. We're good with this plan, right? No, he says, when they're going to kill you, they're going to kill me and let you live and may be spared. He said, and that my life may be spared for your sake. And when Abram entered Egypt, the Egyptians saw that the woman was very beautiful. He was right. She did. They saw. She was beautiful. And when the princes of Pharaoh saw her, they praised her to Pharaoh. And the woman was taken into Pharaoh's house. And for her sake, he dealt with her with Abraham. For he had sheep, oxen, male donkeys, male servants, female donkeys, and camels. Now, let's just kind of put this what it is. Abraham basically didn't say a word. He was just that quiet, like, I'm not going to lie, but I'm not going to say anything at the same time. Like, is that your wife? Mm-hmm. You want her? Sure. Okay, cool. And she's gone. He just gave his wife to another person. Like, that's just insane of a Bible character. Like, man of faith, good reputation. To which we can say, well, at least I didn't take my wife and give her to somebody else, right? And it gets worse, because as he gives her to Pharaoh, Pharaoh starts giving Abram a bunch of cool stuff. As his wife is with Pharaoh, he gets like an Xbox, he gets a free TV, he gets a great job, he gets servants, he gets ice cream whenever he wants it. I mean, the guy is just living the life, and he's just getting all this stuff. I mean, people are walking by like, hey, Abraham, cool stuff. He's like, yeah, I know. He's like, where'd you get it all? Pharaoh? Why? He likes me a lot. Let's just leave it there. Have you talked to your wife in a while? No, I haven't seen her. It's weird, but I got all this cool stuff. I mean, he's gotten thing after thing after thing. And to some of our guys in the room, you're like, how does that work again? How does that deal work? You don't want that deal. You don't want that deal. It's a terrible deal. And what he does is he just continues to take and take and take. In verse 17, but the Lord remains faithful despite Abraham being stupid. Okay? And in verse 17, the Lord afflicted Pharaoh and his house with great plagues because of Sarai, Abraham's wife. Pharaoh's got to be like, what in the world is happening? So Pharaoh called Abraham and said, what have you done to me? This woman's causing plagues. That's not normal. That doesn't just happen. He goes, get her out of here. I don't want the plagues. You can have her. What have you done? Why did you not tell me that she was your wife? That had to be the most awkward moment ever. Because I'm assuming Sarah's probably going to be in the mix of that somewhere. Right? Why didn't you tell me this was your wife? In other words, Pharaoh has more trust and more morals than the guy that God has called to make a nation out of. Put that out there. That's amazing. Why did you say she is my sister so that I took her as my wife? Now then, here's your wife. Take her and go. Get out of here. Leave us alone. I don't want these plagues anymore. And Pharaoh gave men orders concerning him, and they sent him away. This is cool. This is God. This is cool. And they sent him, Abram, away with his wife and what? All he had. He has the Xbox still. He's got the ice cream machine. He's got all of it with him, right? I mean, he's got everything with him. Pharaoh didn't take it back. I don't know if he thought it was cursed and tainted. We don't know. But Abraham, in God's sovereignty, gives him all of these things that he will later need. It's not going to be an Xbox, but I'm telling you, he had more than what he needed to create a nation, and it was given to him by Pharaoh. We know this because in 13 verses 2 through 4, it says this, now Abraham was very rich in livestock, in silver, and in gold. Where'd he get it? Pharaoh. Isn't that crazy? God uses the Egyptians to give to Abraham what he needs for this. Abram's very rich in livestock and silver and gold, and he journeyed on from the Negeb as far as Bethel to the place where his tent had been at the beginning, between Bethel and Ai. And the place where he had come made an altar at first, and there Abraham called upon the name of the Lord. They had so much stuff, it says in 13, that they had so much stuff that they started to kind of implode on each other, and Abraham and Lot look at each other and say, we have too much stuff. This was the issue with Babel, actually, too. They had accumulated all this stuff by coming together, and God's like, you need to separate. You need to go each other's different ways, because if you continue to do this, if you stay in one spot, you're going to kill the land, your livestock's just going to get really unhealthy, and you're not going to be able to expand any further. Isn't that cool? God's sovereignty even sees the nuances of our life. He says, if you stay here, it's not going to be good. You got to divide out. You got to go. You got to split up, the two of you. So the story in 13, we won't go into all of it. Abraham and Lot decide they need to split up, and they need to go different ways. And so Abraham says, well, let's think about this. Where do we want to go? And they look at the land in verse 18. And so Abraham says, well, let me go back a little bit. 14, then the Lord said to Abraham, after Lot had separated from him, lift up your eyes and look from the place where you are northward and southward and eastward and westward. For all the land that you see, I will give you. So basically, they decide where to go. Lot takes the good land that he thinks of. Abraham takes his land, and now they've separated enough to where they're now going different ways, and God is continuing to say, hey, even in your choice, I am going to make you faithful. Just to make sense of that, let me just jump back real quick. Verse 8, then Abraham said to Lot, let there be no strife between you and me, and between your herdsmen and my herdsmen, for we are kinsmen. Verse 9, is not the whole land before you? Separate yourself from me. If you take the left hand, then I will go to the right. If you take the right hand, then I will go to the left. And Lot lifted up his eyes and saw that the Jordan Valley was well watered everywhere, like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt in the direction of Zoar. Little parentheses here. This was before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. So you get a little caveat of where this is heading. But Lot leads to the land that looks really good, really pretty, really amazing. Abraham's left with the other land. Abraham continues to go, and Abraham is told by God, I'm going to give you even more than what you think. So, verse 18, we see that Abraham moved his tent and came and settled to the oaks of Mamre, which are the Hebron that he built, where he built an altar to the Lord. In the middle of that, the interesting thing is this, we get the third promise, where he says this, the Lord says to Abraham after Lot separated, lift up your eyes and look from the place where you are, northward, southward, eastward, westward. For all the land that you see, I will give to you and to your offsprings forever. I will make your offspring as the dust of the earth, so that if one can count the dust of the earth, your offspring can also be counted. You ever have that like dust thing in the morning where you kind of see the dust in your house and you're like, oh, we need to clean it, right? But the sunlight's hitting it and it's just reflecting all these little dust particles. He says, if you could count all those dust particles, he says, even that wouldn't be able to count the number of people or generations that will come out of you, Abraham. It'll be as if the dust on the earth. You count the dust on the earth, your offspring shall also be counted. Arise, verse 17, walk through the length and the breadth of the land, for I will give it to you. Oh, ladies and gentlemen, that would be amazing. To just say, God, this gives you land and acres of land. Some of you guys in this room, you're like, yes. God just gives you acres of land, and your job for the next couple years is just to walk the breadth of it. This is my land. Just get to enjoy it. Just get to walk it, till it. This is my land. This is what I get. And that's Abraham. He just gets to walk the breadth of it. So Abraham moved his tent and came and settled at the oaks of Mamre, and he built an altar there to the Lord. Now, all these promises are amazing to watch. And all his faithfulness is seen. Promise after promise after promise is given here to Abraham. And you're going to see more next week, promises by God to Abraham. But for this week, I think the amazing thing in all of this is that as he goes, there are promises that are kept by God, but also there's a response by Abraham everywhere he goes. And this is the part we didn't cover in chapter 12. So go back with me just for a second in chapter 12 and hear what Abraham did every step along the way to Egypt and every step along the way out of Egypt. Here's what Abraham does. 12:7, then the Lord appeared to Abraham, to your offspring I will give this land. So he built an altar there to the Lord who had appeared to him. So the first stop after Haran, as he stops in Shechem, And on the map, you'll see here, he travels all the way from Turkey, all the way down into southern Syria, to where now Israel is going to become a nation out of. The promises of God are being seen. This is modern day, by the way. So all the way down into Israel is where he travels to Shechem. And as he arrives at Shechem, he builds an altar to the Lord to worship. You're not going to be able to read that, but it's basically telling you what I'm telling you. Shechem was his first stop. God promises Abraham that this land will be given to him and to his descendants. Did it come true? Is there a Jewish nation somewhere around that area today? Yeah, kind of a big deal. Pretty big major nation. Well, not major, big, but major as in powerful nation that is still there today. God keeps his promises to generations. And first thing Abraham does is he builds an altar and he worships because of God's promises of his faithfulness in his life. Second stop, he moves from there, he travels south again, and he stops at Bet-El, and this is 12:8. From there, he moved to the hill country on the east of Bethel and pitched his tent, with Bethel on the west and Ai on the east. And there at Bet-El, he also does the same thing. So if you see the map here, he travels south, and he continues from 3 to 4, and he moves into Bet-El, and he builds an altar here. And there he built an altar to the Lord and called upon the name of the Lord. He remembers his faithfulness, and he says, God, because of your faithfulness, I worship you here. And it was a sign not only to him, but also to his family that he was following the heart of God. And then the return trip from Egypt, he's now gone to Egypt. He's working his way back up. And this is chapter 13, verses 3 and 4. After he's told his wife to go to Pharaoh, that whole thing, he's got his supplies. He leaves Egypt. He now heads back up north, verses 3 and 4, chapter 13. And he journeyed on from Negeb as far as Bethel to the place where his tent had been at the beginning between Bethel and Ai, to the place where he had made an altar at first. And there Abraham called upon the name of the Lord. So the map goes like this. He goes back up then from Egypt all the way back to where he was. And it's here that he also walks the land in chapter 13, verse 18. So Abraham moved his tent and came to settle by the oaks of Mamre, which are the Hebron, and there he built an altar to the Lord. So again, you see these two sections are highlighted here as the place where he worshiped and started to set up residence and say, this will be my place. It is amazingly, well, it's not really coincidental, but it is truthful to say that the only place Abraham did not worship was where? Egypt. The only place he didn't was when he was in rebellion. The only place he didn't worship was when he went to a place and he stayed on his own and he lost his faith and he took his wife and he said, here, have her, because I don't know what to do. He freaks out because of fear, pride, and arrogance, and he just says, this is yours. I don't trust God anymore. And it's only in Egypt that we find a lack of worship. You see, when you apply God's faithfulness and his promises to your worship will become far more passionate, far more engaged. You'll worry less about what people think around you as you're singing. You're going to think less about raising your hands, not raising your hands. Where do I land in that area? I don't seem too Pentecostal. Do I go halfway? Right? Like, you got to go full in. I mean, you just got to. I mean, I got armpit stains and everything. I'm going full in. So it's that it's not worried about who's around you. It is the full idea of if God has been faithful, I will return that faithfulness with worship back to him. Abraham says, I am giving God worship for each place he has given to me. Because here's the thing, when we forget God's promises, we forget to worship him. We forget how far he's taken us. We forget that he is the one to worship. We start to give in to some of these other emotions that we see in Egypt. And the top three, I think, that come when we have a lack of faithfulness, when we have a lack of tracing God's will in our life, it comes to three major areas, I think. Pride, fear, and despair. And I think when we forget God's faithfulness, we go into any one of those three. I got me here. I did it. I made the job happen. I built this church. What? I made it happen. Abraham didn't make a thing happen. The only thing he made happen was giving his wife away. That's what he made happen. Okay? let's be honest. When we forget God's faithfulness, isn't it true that we always revert back to ourselves and how good we are or how bad we are? But it always ends with me. Me. I am in the center of my life. And then you start to go from me into fear. Because here's what happens. When you, I, me aren't enough, what else do you got? I don't know, my job, my kids, I got something maybe, but ultimately, if it all depends on me, we're done. Amen. If it all depends on you, you're done. If it all depends on you and your ability to do something correctly, let's just be honest, we're all there. It ain't going to happen. So pride then leads to fear, and then fear, if it's left long enough, then leads to despair. I'm never, ever going to get out of this scenario. I'm never going to be able to. God was faithful in the past, but he can't answer me today. God was really good in Negeb, and he was really good in Haran, and he was good at Shechem, but he's not good in Egypt. He can't take it that far. Pride is the absence of a long view of promise. Let me say that again. Pride is the absence of the long view of promise. Pride is the easiest thing to get into because we live in a culture of immediacy. We live in a culture that if it doesn't happen tomorrow, it's not worth believing in. I have to do this because if I don't, it'll all fall apart in the next hour. Pride is the absence of the long view of promise because it says, I deserve more. It gets us into the funky parts of our life where we just get into those pity parties and life's all about me, and we forget God's faithfulness along the way. It also gets into the idea of pride that says, I don't like where I'm at right now. I don't like the marriage that I'm in right now, so I'm going to go find a new one. Pride is that biggest declaration. Well, that's not pride. That's just because I'm not happy. Is it? Because ultimately, pride takes us and says, there's got to be better land somewhere else. There's got to be a better wife somewhere else. And we leave what we have because we've lost the idea of a long view of promise. Fear. Fear is the fear that God is not fixing this. This must mean I'm alone. God didn't fix it yesterday. God didn't fix it the week before. God still took that life. God didn't come through. Therefore, I am on my own. I have no hope because all that's left is me. God's not fixing this, so he must not be enough. So I'll turn to my emotions because apparently they're enough. I'll trust my emotions more than I trust God because at least they're louder at this point. Don't buy into those lies. Despair is probably one of the worst places you could be. You see, there's a difference between somebody saying, I'm just really angry at God versus somebody who says, I just don't care about God. Right? That's a big difference. I'll take somebody who's angry with God all the time. What's harder is somebody who says, I just don't care about God. He's not even registering on my radar. I could care less. The guy does not bother me in the slightest. Whatever you want, doesn't bother me. Don't care about him. Despair is the acceptance of the long-term promise. You see it, but you see no hope in it. You see no hope in a long-term promise. It may be there, but you see no hope. You've just written God off as being out there, but not for you here. God's promises are to guys like to Abraham, but they're not to guys like me, right? God's promises are true, but they're not always convenient. They're not always on our time schedule. Faith is the trust in God who keeps his promises even when the promises don't seem like they've been met. You're going to see that in Abraham's life consistently. Faith, let me just say this, faith without the friction is not real faith. Faith without resistance and friction and hard things to test it, that's just feeling good. That's just life's good, happy. That's just all the Christian cliches you hear all the time. Well, God's got you, right? Don't give up. He's still working. Is he? Because if you knew my life, it doesn't really feel like he's working. You see, I think we often assume that Christianity, following Jesus, is easy. That following Jesus, it should just be this walk through the park, but when all reality, friction is part of Abraham's story from Genesis 12 to the time he dies. There is friction in Abraham's life. And faith without friction, I don't believe is really true faith. If you don't have to struggle through what you believe, it's just too convenient. Abraham, I'm 100% confident, had all those same thoughts of pride, despair, and fear. Yet as we look at him, we see the one who consistently looked back to God and said, God doesn't lie. He keeps his promises. Yahweh does not lie. I will hold on to what is true. And as a result, I will worship him every single step of the way. I'll worship him every place I go. He says he doesn't break his vow, therefore I will worship. Vibrant worship is those moments where we look back at the faithfulness of God in our lives and we say, man, has he been good? It's not been easy. I would have run things maybe a little differently at that section or that section of my life. I probably would have chose, go back to the 80s and the Choose Your Own Adventure books, right? I probably would have chose page 82 verses 67, right? But ultimately, he's led me where he needs me to be. And he's been faithful every step of the way. This morning, I told you to turn your phones off. And I was on purpose. One of those things is, how'd that feel? Because I think so often we get so drawn into the immediacy of our world, and we're so scared of missing out or not being on call, or somebody could miss our call, or somebody could not be available to us at a certain moment, that we just get caught up in all these pride, fear, and despair even more. We start freaking out. Why didn't they call me back? Why didn't they text me? Why didn't they? Calm down. This should be a place on Sunday where you're able to take time to reflect on God's worship, or on God's goodness in your life, and to give back to him that worship. So we're going to give you that opportunity this morning. I'm going to have Rich come, and he's going to lead us in that song we sang earlier called Evidence. And here's what I would love for you to do is he's going to lead us through, and then we're going to take some time for you to actually just have a space here before we jet out of here, a space for you to write down those things on paper so you can actually do it. Those areas where God has been faithful in your life. And I think as you think through those things, it'll remind you again of the faithfulness of his promises, and you'll be able to see his goodness of where he's taking you from and where he's taking you to this morning. So Rich is going to lead us. I'm going to come back up in here in just a second, and we'll go on from there.